sounds and feels probably quite counterintuitive, because again, our culture doesn't really do a good job about talking about it. It is a frightening thing, and it can be very sad and emotionally charged. But I think a big part of that is because we don't talk about it. And when we do open up ourselves and we become a little bit more vulnerable, we can add dignity and beauty and love and new memories, even in that final chapter of our lives. We also spoke a little bit about illness trajectory. And I believe I showed you sort of the idea of that descending staircase. Um, Illness trajectory really brings into play those chronic illnesses that we may be living with. So that could be CHF or chronic heart failure, chronic kidney disease, COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It can be cancer and dementia. And all of these illnesses, unfortunately, are progressive over time, with, of course, the exception of a curable cancer. But if it's an incurable cancer or one of those chronic illnesses I just listed, they advance over time, which means that we kind of look at this staircase as descending because we're losing things as we go over time. At first, we might notice on the outside we're losing different functions. Maybe we're no longer able to drive, or we can't walk without the assistance of a walker, or we might advance to not being able to dress or bathe ourselves without the assistance of someone else. But then what we also know is that we're losing things on the inside, right, systemically. So our GI system might have a harder time managing our urine, or so we might start pooling some of that fluid, and we might be on diuretics, right, to lessen that fluid burden. Our lungs might not function as efficiently as we would like, so now we're needing external oxygen, or our heart, and we need medications to monitor our blood pressure. All of these things ultimately lead to an end stage part of your illness. And the reason that I want to talk about it now and encourage you all to talk about it now is because we really should start these conversations as soon as we're diagnosed. Although many of these illnesses you can have for years, you can live for decades because of the medical advancements that we have and because of the medications within our reach. You can have a very long, fulfilling life. But unfortunately, too often, our treatment team, our medical team, our primary care physicians might not talk about what that illness is going to look like when it is in its later stages. And one of the hardest things that I see on the individuals' faces that I work with when they find out that their loved one or themselves are in that final stage, they feel like the rug got pulled out from underneath them. Here they were living with COPD for 15 years. And yes, their oxygen needs change. They went from needing no oxygen to 1 liter, maybe to 3 liters at home, but they were still able to go to their grandkids' games, go on walks, enjoy the beach, things like that. But then all of a sudden, they were in this end stage and they really couldn't get out of bed without feeling short of breath. And so they're very often frustrated. Why didn't I know about this sooner? I would have done things differently. I would have talked to my family. And so that's why I really encourage all of you listening to talk to your primary care doctors or any specialist that you have, your cardiologist, your pulmonologist, your nephrologist, your neurologist, to talk about whatever illnesses might ail you and get their perspective. What will this look and feel like in a year, 5 years, 10 years, and so on? The other thing that we spoke about last month were healthcare proxies, which I just grabbed. So it'd be a form that looks sort of like this. And they might look a little bit different depending on which hospital or attorney or website you visit. But essentially, healthcare proxies give you the power and the control to identify individuals that you trust to make well-informed medical decisions on your behalf if there is a moment where you can't. I really encourage everyone to name at least 2 individuals. So you want to have a primary healthcare agent and then an alternate. And the reason for that is it's it can be overwhelming and it can be emotional when you're acting on behalf of someone that you love and they're going through a difficult time, a medical emergency. And so to have an alternate person on this form sort of gives them built-in support. It also allows them, if they are unable for some reason to serve in that capacity, you still have another individual listed that you trusted. In Massachusetts, as I talked about last month, we unfortunately don't honor next of kin. So if you do not have one of these forms, it doesn't automatically go to your spouse or your next of kin. There are exceptions to that rule, meaning if you find yourself in a critical care unit or an ICU and there's emergent decisions needed to be made and this form does not exist, then the medical team will defer to your spouse or your next of kin. However, once you're stabilized and there are more long-term decisions needed, if you do not have this form, then the state would require that you seek a guardianship. And it's okay if that happens. It's just not ideal because this form is free and it is legally recognized as you, in your right mind, appointing people that you trust to make decisions. Whereas a guardian, your family would now be tasked with going to court to file for appointment, which it can cost hundreds to thousands of dollars, and it also can take time. And if your loved ones are already worrying about your well-being because you're in a hospital setting, and now they're having to wait on attorneys and the court system to acknowledge their right to act on your behalf, it just adds so much unnecessary stress, which can be avoided by having this form. The last thing I will say about the healthcare proxy is that I do meet with individuals who feel very overwhelmed by the idea of filling this out. They don't want to give up their rights to their body. It feels like I'm handing off the ability to make my own decisions, and I want to assure you that that is not the case. This remains a piece of paper until a physician says that you are unable to make your own medical decisions. Only then would the individuals on this form have any right to make medical decisions on your behalf. It also can be temporary. So if you have an acute episode where you are intubated or cognitively impaired for a short period, they might activate or invoke this proxy, meaning if you put your spouse would make decisions for you. But as soon as you regain that cognitive ability, then they would revoke it or take it away. It would just become a piece of paper again, and you would then resume making your own medical decisions. I cannot overstate this enough. If I had any measure of success of these talks, it would be that everyone in Fairhaven over the age of 18 has a healthcare proxy in place. The next thing that we talked a little bit about was this idea of advanced care planning or goals of care. And that is an umbrella term talking about what is important to you and your life and your medical care and your treatment. And it involves talking to your healthcare proxies, so the individuals that you appoint, as well as your medical team. And it talks a lot about things that you're willing to partake in and things that you aren't. And there could be so many reasons why you are willing or not willing to go through something. It could be past experiences, having already tried something and having a bad reaction to it, knowing someone who tried a medical intervention and it didn't go how they were hoping, and so you'd rather avoid it in the future. I have individuals, because of religious beliefs, they don't accept blood donations. Maybe that's something that you need to tell your medical team. Other individuals who wouldn't want to do dialysis, or maybe they would, but only if they were in the category of people who were believed by their medical team to be able to go to work and still enjoy activities, but have dialysis a few days a week. But you may say, if you're someone that would likely be bedbound with that decision, that that's not something that you would want to do. The best time to talk about these advanced care planning and these goals of care is now or yesterday. You do not want to leave this until you're in a medical crisis, because then you might not A, be able to say what you're looking for, and B, again, it's a very emotional time when someone that we love is not doing well. And we want to give our loved ones the most information and confidence when they have to start participating in our care and in our decision making. So I would, again, encourage you to create a healthcare proxy, but then spend time with the individuals that you select and make sure that they know what you would want in a variety of situations. There's no such thing as too much detail. There is definitely something to be said for individuals who don't slow down and take the time to have these conversations. And then the last thing that we talked about last month was the MOLST, which is very much in line with all of this, the Medical Order of Life-Sustaining Treatment, or soon to be the PULST with a P, Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. That was that bright pink form that I showed you that really highlights those decisions that we just talked about. Do I want dialysis? Would I be okay with artificial nutrition? Do I want to be intubated? Do I want resuscitation? All of those decisions, you can complete those forms with your primary care provider or your specialist. I also have a lot of clients and patients that might see their nurse practitioner more than they actually see the physician in their primary care practice or their physician assistants. And they too can complete these forms with you. So I think that is a good summary, I hope, of what we talked about last month. And so today I want to switch gears and sort of talk about, where do I get care? And what does that care look like? And what am I eligible for? So I made a cheat sheet. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it at home, but the top half of this form is sort of where can I get care? And the bottom half is different types or approaches to care. So first, we can start by receiving care at home. And maybe many of you have. This could look like visiting nurses. If you've had an acute illness or an acute setback physically, such as an infection or a fracture, you might end up having rehab at home, skilled nursing, helping with wound care or IV access, things like that. You can also receive care in an independent senior living community. Those, again, they usually don't offer any hands-on medical care in that setting, but you're within this sort of community that has access to a lot of resources. Day programs, they usually do have a nurse on staff for sort of emergencies or very specialized specific needs. Assisted living facilities, this is when our needs start to increase. Maybe we need reminders to take our medication every day. Maybe we do need some assistance with getting dressed or getting down to meals. There are different types of assisted livings. There's a residential model, which really is for higher functioning individuals who can pretty much manage everything on their own. And then there are medical models, which do have a little bit more staff management on board, nursing and nursing aides, but still the hands-on care is quite minimal. Within these independent senior living and assisted living facilities, because often they're on the same property, there can be memory care units, which really, of course, focus on any individual that's living with a neurocognitive disorder, such as dementia, Parkinson's, where that unit does typically provide 24 hours of nursing and CNA or nursing assistant care, because we know that those individuals need help with remembering their medications, taking their medications, getting bathed, dressed, fed, getting to activities for their enjoyment. There is also long-term care, long-term acute care I wanted to talk about first. So long-term acute care is sort of a step down from hospital care. So you may have gone into the hospital because of a stroke or because of respiratory failure and required intubation. And your recovery is anticipated to be quite long, but you're really needing almost the level of hospital care. So you would go to one of these long-term acute care settings or LTACs, and that would be to really beef up the rehab that you're getting after a stroke, or working with a respiratory specialized team to maybe advance you off the trach if it's assessed to be a temporary measure. Um, a step down from that is short-term rehab. We kind of commonly use the term nursing homes or nursing facilities. And under that umbrella, under that same roof, there's different levels of care. So short-term rehab can take place at a nursing facility. And that is when, again, you might have had a fracture, can't quite go home, need something to help you get more strong or stable on your feet before you transition home. So you might go to a short-term rehab. Maybe you just have some deconditioning. You were in the hospital for chemotherapy and you just had a reaction or just sort of drained a lot from you, and you've spent so much time in the hospital and in bed that you go to short-term rehab to, again, sort of strengthen your muscles, get steady again on your feet, improve your endurance before going home. Nursing facilities also have long-term care. Again, within the same building most times. And long-term care is for individuals who can't return home, or at least not in the foreseeable future, for a multitude of reasons. Maybe their home is just not structured adequately to help with any handicap, needs, right? Hallways are very narrow, doorways are very narrow. Or maybe there's just not enough support in the community to provide that 24 hours of care. So you move into a long-term care facility, and that really becomes your residence. You're there 24 hours a day. They provide all your meals, all your care, all your medication. And then you can also receive hospice or end-of-life care in a nursing home or a nursing facility umbrella. And that sort of looks like, again, it becomes your home. The staff at the nursing facility would provide your sort of routine or day-to-day care around the clock. But then you can also have this outside entity of hospice come into those facilities and provide additional individualized care, meaning as wonderful as the nursing staff is at the nursing facilities, they often have to go answer those call bells that are going off right down the hall, or they have to answer the ringing phone. And so sometimes it can feel like you're not able to get all that time you really wanted with your nurse or with your nursing assistant, despite their efforts. So if you have hospice coming in, that nurse or that aide is really there just for you. They don't have to worry about answering the ringing phone or answering the door. They can spend their time just with you, making sure that your symptoms are well managed, making sure that you just have a kind, compassionate companion to spend your time with. And so those are sort of the overview of locations of care. The hospital, which I should have listed here, is really for acute short-term care, right? The acute emergent crisis care. So you go into respiratory failure, you have cardiac arrest, you have symptoms of a stroke, you have a major fall, and you go to the hospital so that they can sort of fix or temporize whatever brought you there in the first place. And then in the hospital, I encourage you to talk to your medical team about, what's it going to look like now, right? Like, how am I going to feel tomorrow? How am I going to feel in a week? How is this going to feel and look in a month? So that you can best decide which other location of care is the next in line. And sometimes this changes depending on your reaction to any medical interventions that are provided. Sometimes it changes based on what you now feel is appropriate for you. You might go into the hospital because you've been getting chemotherapy for an underlying cancer, and it made sense for so long, and it gave you this time, and you were tolerating it okay. But then the disease changed, and maybe it's harder to tolerate it. And so even though you went into the hospital thinking, I want to continue treatment, you might now have a different idea. Maybe it's too much. Maybe you want to shift your focus on feeling as good as you can and being home with the people that you love. And so you want to continuously have these conversations. Which brings me to, the bottom of that form, which is sort of approaches to care, right? So there's community-based care, which is going to your primary care doctor, having visiting nurses come into your home with physical therapy and nursing and occupational therapy and speech therapy, whatever you need. And then there's private care needs, right? So maybe you hire nursing assistants or companions to just assist you intermittently throughout the week or even intermittently throughout the day, depending on what your needs are and your financial ability is. Then there's that hospital acute care setting, which I just described. It's really meant to fix or temporarily kind of improve an acute episode before finding a longer term location for care. Um, when we're talking about long-term acute care, that facility that I spoke to you about, that is again when we need a higher level of intensity of care. It is a step below hospital care. So you're getting 3+ hours of physical therapy, occupational therapy. You're getting intense nursing, skilled nursing care, meaning lots of attention to respiratory needs or wound needs. Sometimes you are there for weeks. Usually 2 weeks is what we're looking at. Sometimes it extends past that 4 weeks, 6 weeks. It sort of depends on your progress. And as the medical team is assessing your care needs, whether or not you meet the eligibility to stay there, or if you've made improvements enough or plateaued to a point where you're not making gains anymore, then you might transition to a nursing facility of some type or back home. Then we have the short-term rehab and the long-term care, which I sort of explained when we were talking about different places to receive care. So I won't go into that again, but I do want to talk about palliative and hospice care. I touched upon this a little bit last month, and palliative care is the broader umbrella. So under palliative care, we are looking at any type of chronic, progressive, life-limiting illness. And you become eligible for palliative care as soon as you are diagnosed with a chronic illness, such as chronic kidney disease, chronic heart failure, COPD, dementia, because again of that idea of the descending staircase. We know that at some point, even if we're able to live for a very long time with these illnesses, they're going to have new symptoms and new changes in our functioning that might require additional support. And so that's when you pull in palliative care. Their main hope is to do symptom management, so lessen your symptom burden. If you're having a lot of nausea, they want to improve that. If you're having a lot of physical pain, aches and pains, they want to improve that. Anxiety, trouble sleeping, shortness of breath. They want to make you feel as good as you can under that context of whatever disease you're living with in that time. With palliative care, you can still be getting life-sustaining treatment, right? So you can still be on dialysis. You can still want to try surgical interventions. You can still, be pursuing a transplant or chemotherapy or immunotherapy. But palliative medicine wants to try to make that process as painless as possible. And they also spend a great deal of time with you, getting to know who you are, what your values are, who your family is, so that as things change and advance, you have already had a lot of these conversations at least started, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming for you or your family. And then the other approach to care is hospice care. And hospice care really does focus on our end of life, that last chapter, but it has changed a lot over recent years. The hospice philosophy is the same, right? They want you to have as many good days as you can. And the focus, again, is keeping you as comfortable as they can with the understanding that treatment is no longer either an option or available, or the treatment that is available has caused so much symptom burden that it poses more risk than benefit. And so the focus sort of shifts to quality of life and dignity of life instead of quantity of days. And you can receive hospice care in all of those settings, in nursing facilities, at home, the medical model, assisted living facilities. Hospice comes to you, or you can have hospice at a hospice house, which There aren't several in the state, but there are some, and they are wonderful. They're usually much smaller, around 12 beds on average, I would say, give or take. They're they're modeled to make it feel like home when you can't be home. They treat not just the individual living with the life-limiting illness, but also their family. They want you to be there as much as you can be. They can be very creative in making sure that there's still joy and things to look forward to during that final time in our lives. And then they also offer support after loss. So again, they stay with the family, they stay with the bereaved to give support, to talk through difficult things, to assist them with next steps. So those are the locations and approaches for care. I don't know if there's any questions that are popping up. I'm going to pause there for a second because I feel like I just spoke very fast about a lot of things. Okay. Well, then I want to shift focus to dementia, which is a giant topic. So dementia is often used kind of interchangeably with Alzheimer's disease. And dementia, again, is one of those umbrella terms. So dementia really refers to any neurocognitive impairment, progressive disease that hinders our ability to think or make well-informed decisions, right? We lose our memory, we lose our reasoning ability often. And Alzheimer's is underneath that umbrella, although it is the most common type of dementia. So it usually covers between 60 and 80% of individuals living with dementia are diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. And Alzheimer's dementia occurs when there's this buildup of plaque on our brains. And so those areas of our brain start to no longer function optimally. And it can progress quickly, or it can take several years. And usually the first person to have any indication that they're living with Alzheimer's dementia is the individual themselves, but they might not know what to name it. And so the symptoms can look like, I keep forgetting my keys. I swear I put them down on the cabinet, the countertop, and they're not there. They might start forgetting individuals' names when they bump into them outside of the context, right? If they see someone at church that they know really, really well from going to church, but then they see them in a supermarket, they can't think of their name. Even when reminded, it just doesn't fit, right? And then maybe it starts to advance and they can't find their way home from the grocery store. It's usually around that time that family members start to notice a change too. Like, I swear I talked to mom and she promised that she was going to come to, her granddaughter's basketball game, but I haven't heard from her. Or when I went to visit her, I noticed that there was, trash piled up, or newspapers not thrown out, or groceries that had gone bad that hadn't been thrown away, or medications not taken. And usually when family gets involved, that's when we start talking to doctors and providers because there's this sort of external perspective of like, you know what, mom, you know what, dad, I really think we need to go talk to someone because it feels like we might be having some difficulties with memory. With these types, with dementia, that umbrella term, there's the Alzheimer's. The next most common is vascular dementia, which is around 20% of diagnosed dementias. And that comes on usually either because of gradually reduced or insufficient blood flow to the brain, or acute or sudden, such as a stroke. And you're going to be seeing a lot of the same things. Memory loss, sometimes it affects our personalities. We're seeing falls, right? We're unsteady on our feet. But all of the types of dementia under that big umbrella are progressive in nature. So they usually start with a change in memory or a change in personality, someone becoming more irritable than they normally are, someone becoming more friendly or passive, kind of go with the flow than they normally are. but then we'll start seeing the impact on our physical functioning. So again, we're getting unstable on our feet. We start to see recurrent falls. We start to see repeat infections like UTIs or pneumonias. Um, and then once we're kind of in that moderate to later stages, we're needing a lot of assistance. We need kind of professional care, a lot of hands-on support from our family and friends to make sure that we're eating and bathing and taking care of ourselves in that way. And that's really kind of the umbrella of dementia. I could go through, there's Lewy body dementia and there's frontotemporal lobe dementia. And they all have some unique characteristics, but there's so much overlap. And a lot of times you might have an individual diagnosed with mixed dementia, mixed type, because they do overlap so much that a lot of times we find that people are living with more than one type of dementia at a time. So I wanted to share that. I don't know if there's more. What do you think? I have to ask you, just because I'm thinking without questions, I don't know what else to share about dementia. This might be a good one to have people in-house for, right? Because then I can answer specific questions. I don't want to give so much information that I'm overwhelming anyone watching at home. But it would be helpful if anyone wants to come in, or they can reach out to me. Again, you can email me questions. I'd be happy to answer them. I think the most important takeaway with dementia is, again, to start talking to your providers sooner rather than later. It doesn't mean that by talking about them, you're going to somehow exacerbate or, hasten the progression of that disease or that illness. You can actually have more time doing the things that you want. You can be home more. You can maintain your functioning longer, because if we acknowledge that it exists, then we can put in safeguards. One of the things I know I take for granted, not being in this stage of my life right now, is that I am pretty independent, right? Everyone who's an advanced age or an advanced illness reflects on the fact that yesterday they were 25 and they could do everything on their own. And I know that I take that for granted, and I can only imagine how frustrating and scary and saddening it is when we wake up and our minds and our bodies no longer do what we want. And now suddenly we are going from independent, providing for our family, raising our families, to needing to rely on them and strangers and care providers to help us. And so I see a lot of individuals hold on so tightly to that idea of independence that they actually shortchange themselves. They fight for the wrong thing. We all need help sometimes, even when we're young and independent. But as we age, if we're blessed enough to get older, and we're going to need help. And if you actually add help in sooner, you need less of it for longer, right? But if you wait, you're going to need so much help all of a sudden, and you're not going to know how you got there. I don't know if that makes sense, but every family I work with, I always say, take as much as you can up front, whatever the hospital's offering, whatever your community is offering, whatever your visiting nurses or your hospice agency or your palliative or your oncologist, whatever they're offering, say yes. Because it is always easier to take things away that you decide after a little while, actually, I really don't need occupational therapy. I feel like I can make my cup of coffee and I can get my clothes on just fine. But I do want to keep physical therapy, right? I do want to keep working on doing the stairs and strengthening my lower extremities. You can always take things away. It is so much harder to suddenly have a setback and need a service and have to find it in a crisis, right? That's more difficult. And that's when we see setbacks, because now you're in a crisis. It's like, oh, I should have taken physical therapy. I said I didn't need it. Now I'm so weak and I've fallen, right? And now I've fractured something, or I can't get up, and now I'm in the hospital. And then that hospital stay gets extended because now I have an infection. Where, had I just taken the physical therapy up front, I would have had the strength that I needed. That fall may not have happened, right? I could avoid an entire hospital course. I think that's where I'm going to end, if that's okay. I don't know what else to say. I also know that what I'm talking about is not exciting. My family, you know, supports me so much, but they also tease me, like, because they know this is what I do. So I get why you might not want to come in, but I hope that next month you do. Um, I'm I'm not scary, I promise. I want to help. I want to answer questions. I don't know everything, obviously, but I do work, like I said, in all these different levels of care. I've done hospice care. I work at a hospital. I'm in palliative medicine. I worked at nursing homes and short-term rehabs. I've gone to assisted livings as a hospice agent. So I do have some of the inside scoop, so to speak. And I really hope that I can give you the information that you want that is helpful to you in a meaningful way, that doesn't feel so overwhelming. And I know I'm like, talk, 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 but because I'm talking to myself. So hopefully, if I get to spend time with any of you in person, it won't feel that way. I'll be able to answer your questions more directly. Um, I don't know when our next one is. I know that it's next month. I'm going to look real quick. Let's see. So July 15th at 1 o'clock, I will be here again. I hope very much to have some beautiful faces here with me to keep me company and to keep me on my toes and to ask me challenging questions, um, so that we can continue this dialogue. But I do appreciate you signing in from afar, and I thank the Fairhaven Council on Aging so much for giving me the opportunity to reach out to their community members, just in hopes of making a difference and being here. Thank you.